But once you get to a certain level of flow, the volumes of water are just astronomical, and there's no way you're going to stop that water long enough to let the stuff settle out or to somehow filter it. So in the end, you have to let that water go. So that's why you hear people promoting the idea of low-impact development, to try and let the water infiltrate where it lands. But you can only do that for relatively small amounts of water.
Okay. Any other comments from the panel?
No, I agree completely with what Jeff just indicated. In the stormwater systems, we have hundreds of points of discharges within our community into our creeks and water bodies. So trying to, take the concept of capturing them like you do a wastewater flow to a central facility would be astronomically expensive. And again, the cost, because of Proposition 218, without establishing a user-based fee program, it comes out of general funds, which are highly limited. So the costs would be just too high in order to accommodate a treatment program like that.
See, I want to say, and I want to separate trash from chemicals, because at the end of the day, I can screen for a styrofoam cup or that's fairly easily done, and cities are pretty adept at doing that anyway because they have to. What becomes more complicated is actually treating the water. The discussion that we're having here is more to the latter. We're talking about the water and not the trash as much. The trash is fairly simple. The chemicals become a challenge because getting it out of the water. Mr. Arp,
you're getting to the root of, when I was talking about performance and goals versus process. What concerns me about what's been happening with some of these draft regulations is there's a lot of money being spent on monitoring, going around collecting data, testing the water, little samples of water, this and that. A lot of expense on collecting data, not as much on things that are actually going to improve the water itself. Now, you do need some data, but my concern is you collect enough data and then show that you're not able to actually comply with what you want to do. Now you've set it up so people can come sue your rear end and it costs you a whole lot more money. And so now you've opened up a whole litigation thing. So, I think focusing on how you can actually get something done with the water to the degree that you have the money, focus the money on doing that and not so much on a lot of this paper pushing.
Okay, if you would, Mr. Art, do people ever call you Earp and then like...
Oh, never, not a chance. Okay. It was Wyatt Earp, didn't you know that? It was...
Well, this isn't quite like Dodge City, but it gets... if you were going to fashion some other comments, and you raised a number of things that I think as well are important. Ma'am from Roseville as well, the concerns that you raised about the ability to have local input into the process at the Water Board, as well, I think we should be clear as to the point that you just raised, Jim, as to the outcome versus the process. If we're going to ramp up the amount of money that we spend to collect data, and if we're going to ramp up the regulatory fee, but at the end of the pipeline, you can't assure me that we've actually done anything to make the water better. If I can't fix it, why do I care what happens? So again, it might be that we might be looking at taking the water and moving it someplace beyond that. But that gets to the point that the fellow from Watsonville raised, that you have so much water that the volume may not be something that you could practically shift someplace. So we might be looking at, and the other challenge becomes, is that if the water is not potable, it may not be that you want to move it, or there's not much you could do with it anyway. For example, you may not be able to use it in an agricultural setting because the chemicals that it picked up on the highway may make it unusable as gray water or something like that. So there may need to be a broader perspective of what we do with it as to what's sustainable and something that we can make work, and how do we get it in a fashion where you as a local government are not put in a place where you get a cost that you have no way to pass on because you're precluded from passing on the cost, but you're incurring that cost and it comes out of different pockets. So you've got a regulatory command over here that says you have to do this, but you don't have any way to distribute the cost against anything. And you too have the same problem that many of the people who are going to be the beneficiaries of your roads, just as with Caltrans, I would imagine that upwards of 25% of the people who are on a Caltrans road at any given time don't even live in California. So you could end up where, whether or not that's a person who's driving in to pick up cargo containers out of my district in the Port of Los Angeles. I mean, we have thousands of truckers who come in every day picking up TEUs that they're taking back to other places. We can't charge them for driving on the interstate highway because the federal government told us years ago you can't. So you can't charge him for riding on the highway. He's picking up the TEU to take goods back to Chicago that came into the port of LA or Long Beach. But now you're left holding the bag for the cost of maintaining that road that this gentleman from Chicago or Colorado, or wherever it is that he came from, had to do. All right, well, I appreciate, again, from here, I'm going to...
Yeah, I've been trying to listen to this, and I've heard about 218 and stuff, but the problem you've got right now is that you're creating, an additional regulatory burden that doesn't really give you any cleaner water, okay? And that's where I'm concerned about. I think it goes to your comments about doing a proper cost-benefit analysis. And what we do as the state, we impose all these regulations. We filter it on down to the locals. Locals got to figure out a way to comply with the state regulatory requirements, just like businesses do, schools do, and everybody else. Caltrans has to. And when you really break it down as to how much real benefit you get out of this, what I've really done is I've created another agency, another layer of bureaucracy that increases the administrative costs, and yet the public gets very little actual benefit out of it in the way of cleaner water, more water. We're doing the same thing with energy. We just seem to have this tendency to want to just consume everything with regulatory, creating more of a regulatory climate. And the only jobs we're creating are regulatory jobs, regulators. That's the only jobs you're creating. You're not putting more people back to work, building things. We're not producing anything. The only thing we're really doing is we're administering stuff. And if we don't get back to actually producing, putting people back to work, actually doing things, and that's where I'm concerned about this whole policy that we're looking at right now. You got groundwater situation. This state's a big state. One of the things that contaminate groundwater more than anything else is when we have these massive firestorms that come out there, and then we get all the huge runoff coming off the mountains and everything else. Well, who are you going to have take out that permit? God? I mean, or how about the federal government? They own 50% of the state. I mean, but that's causing the problem. So who ends up getting stuck with the burden? It's that poor sucker that's downstream. Okay, then all of a sudden becomes their burden. They're the ones that have the responsibility. Well, how about the chipmunk out there that chewed the wire down or something like that caused the fire? Or how about the bolt of lightning that came in? They caused it darn thing. So that's what I'm getting really concerned about. What's going on here? We don't allow proper management of our timber system. We don't allow proper thinning out of the forestries.
Hold up! Don't go anywhere. Let me do something. I'm going to ask.
Well, you get me all excited.
That's right. I'm going to ask Sarah Amanzeta, Dorothy Rothrock, and James Simonelli if they would come forward. Let me thank you guys for coming. I've got some information that I want to get back from the two of you that we can include in the record. Sarah, I'm going to ask you to go first because I know you've got a time constraint. And after this panel, we're going to go to public comment. And let me again thank all the panelists who came and for the work that you put in.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
By the way, while this next panel is getting squared away, one of the things that when we're talking about this kind of an issue, I'm thinking about asphalt. There's nothing more toxic out there than asphalt itself. And yet that's what we use as a way to cap off certain types of dangerous hazard natural materials like arsenic or asbestos in the natural form. If you run into contamination issues, one of the requirements we require for containment is to put an asphalt cap on it.
Right.
Okay, so there's just a whole bunch of stuff out there that
Well, no, you're right. Well, hold that because Mr. Watson isn't gone. And Ms. Emmons-Zeta, you're up, and thank you for giving us this time.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Wright and committee members. My name is Sarah Emmons-Zeta, and I'm the acting director for the California Coastkeeper Alliance. And let the record show that if there is a human sacrifice at this hearing, I'm certainly it, as the, I believe, only environmental representative in attendance today. California Coastkeeper Alliance represents 12 waterkeepers throughout California, and CCKA, along with our network of waterkeepers, have been actively involved in ensuring the control of stormwater pollution for the past 20 years. Our local waterkeepers review, inspect, and negotiate best management practices and monitor industrial facilities discharging stormwater. Our organization has worked closely with the State Water Board to develop, adopt, and implement stormwater permits that comply with federal and state laws, are easy to enforce, and actually improve water quality. I want to make 3 key points today. The first point is that these permit revisions are badly needed and they're long overdue. Secondly, these stormwater regulations actually protect a large part of California's economy, the ocean and coastal sector, and can create green infrastructure jobs. So to the first point, these permit revisions are long overdue. As the State Water Board's executive director covered, the industrial stormwater permit was last updated in 1997, and the other permits have not been updated in years, as is required by federal law. Why are revisions needed? Why do we need to update this? Why can we not just extend this for 5 years, as one of the senators suggested earlier? Under the Federal Clean Water Act, the State Water Board is required to regulate stormwater pollution to the maximum extent practicable. In 2010, 83% of California's rivers and streams the State Water Board assessed were deemed impaired or so severely polluted that people could not fish in them, swim in them, or drink the water, which is the primary intent of the Clean Water Act. 96% of lakes and reservoirs were too polluted. So that is why these revisions are needed. This is not some random effort to achieve a pristine or perfect environment. They're badly needed regulations to address rampant pollution throughout the state. So we've heard today that perhaps that these are too much change, too quickly, and too much expense. And certainly the economic concerns that have been raised today are quite troubling. But effective stormwater management is actually essential to California's ocean and coastal-centered economy. According to the National Ocean Economics Program, California has the largest ocean economy in the United States. Our ocean economy supports a vibrant tourism industry, a diverse fishing industry, international ports, and other businesses. And California's ocean-dependent economy is estimated at between $43 billion and $46 billion. In 2010, California's coastal communities helped draw approximately 200 million visitors to California. Visitor spending directly supported jobs for approximately 873,000 Californians and resulted in $6.1 billion in direct state and local tax revenues. Beach pollution restricts this growth by driving away beachgoers. As Senator Wright noted earlier, if stormwater pollution can cause beaches to be closed and therefore restricting this tourism revenue. So how do these stormwater regulations relate to the ocean and coastal and beach economy? Polluted runoff, both contaminated stormwater and non-stormwater runoff, is the most significant and widespread source of contamination of coastal waters. Poor stormwater management may also increase flooding, causing property damage from flash floods and leading to higher insurance rate. Millions of dollars are spent on treating the symptoms of stormwater pollution, but much less is spent on efforts to control its causes. And we've heard a lot of requests today for common sense solutions that actually achieve benefits that we can see. our organizations believe that low-impact development techniques that slow and sink stormwater flow can both reduce polluted runoff and create new low-energy localized water supplies, particularly in Southern California, to reduce dependence on Northern California supplies. I handed out a report that was just released yesterday called Water Works: Rebuilding Infrastructure, Creating Jobs, Greening the Environment. If the committee would please turn to page 5, this report created an assessment of what an investment in water infrastructure would do nationally for our economy. The report found that an investment to upgrade water infrastructure to comply with federal requirements would generate $255 billion in economic activity and create close to 1.9 million jobs. So what does this mean for California? In California, on page 25 of the report, which I did not provide because it's quite lengthy. Yes, well, I can provide the full report. An estimated 120,000 to 199,000 jobs could be generated in California from building green infrastructure and implementing the sort of low-impact development strategies that actually capture rainwater so that we can use it. It's a no-regrets strategy that has multiple benefits. And I just want to leave the committee with a request to please reach out to our groups on this work. We are interested in working together on solutions. We've been working in these processes for years. We attend all of the hearings at the State Water Board. We review the comments and the permits, multiple drafts, and we are very interested in working with the committee and the business community to craft permits that actually improve water quality and that sustain California's economy. Thank you.
Okay, and I know your time. What's your, when do you have to get out? Because that'll determine whether or not we do questions with you or go to.
Oh, I was supposed to leave at 12, so.
Okay. The challenge, I think, where we have to be careful in some of the discussion of green jobs, it's like if you gave me beluga caviar, I'd throw it away because I don't like beluga caviar. Now, somebody else might say, wow, this is like really good stuff. How could you throw away the beluga caviar? Because I don't like it. The challenge when I hear people describe green jobs is that something that you would do on the natural? If I would, then the fact that it's a green job makes good sense because it's something that I would do. If what you're proposing is not something that I would do, and for example, if I take California, many of the discussions or many of the things that we propose are not things that other people would do. So that what happens, for example, in my district, Boeing makes airplanes. McDonnell Douglas used to make a whole lot more planes there before Boeing bought them, before they went bankrupt, trying to make planes in Long Beach. When Boeing goes to Seattle and makes airplanes, the cost per plane is cheaper, in large part because the regulations in Seattle are less expensive and onerous than the regulations in Long Beach. And Seattle ain't too much further away from the ocean than is Long Beach. I just watched a car plant down the street close. It was the last car manufacturing plant in the state of California, which is ironic for a state that has more cars per capita than any region in the world. They were able to make the same car, not a close facsimile, but the exact same car that they were making here, they can make in Texas for $300 a car cheaper. In Houston and San Antonio, where they were making the cars, also fairly close to oceans, and they too are governed by federal laws just as California is. Something has to give if Washington and Texas, who are both governed by the same federal government, can find ways to do things that California can't for a fraction of the money that it costs to do it in California. I'm not saying that, again, that we don't want clean water. I'm saying that this $265 billion that would be generated has to come from someplace. I'm not going to get it from the lady from Roseville because she didn't have it to give me. So the question becomes not whether or not, I'm taking the comment that she made earlier. So since she ain't got it to give, that means in order for me to get the jobs from this $265 billion, I got to get it from someplace. Currently, there ain't nobody volunteering. we're back to the human sacrifice again, which is where that joke came from when I made it up. Nobody's volunteering to give up their livelihood to create this green job. When you cut to the chase, it's not clear that it's going to get the stuff out of the water to begin with. So if we're not going to build massive systems to actually do tertiary treatment to stormwater, perhaps we could. Maybe the low-level impact will have something on future developments. But as the gentleman from Caltrans referenced, most of the freeways were built in the 50s and 60s, so you'd have an enormous cost, and it's not clear, again, where you get the money from, because Caltrans indicated that the gas tax and the other things are capped. So we're going to end up with what may be clean beaches and stuff anyway, because there won't be nobody that lives here. And if we eliminate the population, you can achieve the same thing. And I'm not saying that facetiously, because we really just lost a congressional district in the last census. So for the first time, I mean, we kind of sort of skated losing it. But for the first time in the last 40 plus years, we did not see a net growth in California population. So I'm just saying, at some point, not that we say, is it going to be dirty this or dirty that? I'm just saying is that it's not clear that much of what we're doing is going to actually make that much difference to begin with. We're going to comply with federal law. Washington does, Texas does, Oregon does, but somehow they managed to do it for substantially less cost than we do. That also becomes our challenge, because we don't have $265 billion to spend.
Well, that's a national figure. And clearly there are going to be costs associated with infrastructure upgrades, but the bottom line is that California needs to protect its natural resources as an economic strategy, not an environmental strategy. Our economy in this state, and maybe perhaps that differs a little bit from Washington and Texas, depends on our coast and ocean. It depends on people wanting to come here, wanting to swim in the water. That's a critical part of our economy. And so we have to find a way to improve water quality. If we have more than 80% of rivers and streams that have been assessed are too polluted for these activities, that's a major problem that California needs to address.
Well, let me welcome my colleague, Senator Rubio, from the great area of Kern County. They don't have any beaches in Kern County, do they?
You stole my thunder, Mr. Chairman. Well, I wanted to thank the chair of this great committee for allowing me to sit in. I was a bit late because I was traveling up from the Central Valley. It's why I'm wearing boots and actually a Fresno State shirt. That's why my collar. I'm a bulldog today. But I had a question. Given the fact that you bring up the issue of economics, the issue of the state's competitiveness in terms of growing into the future, any study that you look at today by any reputable group has the Central Valley as being the fastest growing region in the state. We have no coastline. What we do have are some homegrown advantages of agriculture, energy, particularly you talk about green energy. It's going to be the mecca for sun, wind, solar projects, etc. Is there any consideration from those along the coastline, given your position, to work with us in the other part of California where we have no coastline, but we have many rivers and streams, etc.? They eventually get to us sometimes from the east and the north, to work with us on a set of regulations that perhaps is not a one-size-fits-all, but that applies some common sense approach. And let me give you a concrete example. On my drive today, it was raining quite a bit, and it did all day yesterday. You've heard from different businesses, and I've read in the material, that some, whether it's a cement plant or others, can actually quantify how much it would cost and how they might capture the water, filter it, clean it, etc. I don't know how it can humanly be done in some of these field and farming operations, dairies, etc., where we might be able to do that. So from the reason why I crashed the chairman's party, if you will, is to ask that question from your perspective. Is there some consideration from your group to work with us over in the valley, the Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley, to help us, A, still be good stewards of the environment, do what is right, but B, do it in a manner in which that doesn't significantly impact the one part of our state that, according to so many studies, is going to be the one area that does grow, helps us thrive into the future. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And in fact, in the Central Valley, I focused my previous comments on economic considerations given the committee's focus. But the concerns for water quality in the Central Valley are actually much more closely tied to public health issues. So nowhere in the entire state of California are these stormwater regulations more needed than in the Central Valley, where nitrate contamination is already having serious public health impacts. And a study was just released yesterday that shows that nitrate contamination might actually be lowering IQs. So, there are some serious economic ties to the coast and ocean, but the Central Valley needs these regulations more than anywhere else in the state.
Well, you're changing subjects on me just a bit, because I could also take that and tell you that perhaps the real debate is between rural and urban part of California, where you have gotten more share, your lion's share of grant dollars to help with your wastewater treatment facilities, et cetera, the infrastructure, whereas the Central Valley, because of its poverty levels, has not been able to make upgrades with respect to the lack of infrastructure that it has. I could argue that if you were to work with me, that we could perhaps for $150 million solve many of the problems that we're currently working on, whether it's Kettleman City, Tulare County, Fresno County, some other parts of the valley, where it's true we have high nitrate levels. But going back to the new regulation, if we have a regulatory scheme that will shut down businesses in the Central Valley, you will then take the poorest region, not only in California, but arguably in the country, per the congressional study that was done a few years ago. Make it poor. Those then citizens will not be able to pay the increases to the public utility districts to improve the infrastructure to resolve the nitrate levels. Do you see how this is all intricately tied together? So while you consider not only the challenges tied to public health, back to my question, when we establish these stormwater regulatory schemes, or we establish the new regulatory body, is there a one-size-fits-all, or is there any consideration to take into account the different types of practices that exist throughout the state?
I think that at the state level, the statewide permits need to comply with federal and state legal requirements, but I think that the regional water quality control boards can make specific, variations for permits and specific issues that come up, and they do that.
Got it. So my last question to you, and I appreciate you bringing it up, is I'd love to work with you to get that $150 million for the San Joaquin Valley to improve our nitrate levels, because perhaps some of the questions I have for you are a bit unfair given your coastal ties. Mm-hmm. But I really think that the debate in this building and the story that needs to be told about California is the struggle between the two Californias, the coastal line versus the inner inland valleys that we have and the poverty levels that we have. And I know pertinent to the discussion today, Mr. Chairman, it is front and center the question for me. On one hand is how do we build the infrastructure to deal with our nitrate levels, because it's tied to public health. Similarly, on the other hand, how do we make sure we have a regulatory scheme that partners with the private sector to have jobs in the poorest area, so that we don't have the number of people unemployed, unable to pay their public utility bill to make sure that they have that sewer system and water system. Because we have septic tanks where we're finding fecal matter back into the water subject, and that has a lot to do with it. So I look forward to you working with me on that particular issue, but thank you.
Thank you.
But what I would hope that we would do, and this is a perception that may be unfair, oftentimes there are regulations that are proposed like $900 million for Caltrans, and you say, where did they get that from? Or the discussion from the municipalities about the cost. And there doesn't seem, there's a kind of, we don't care, go find it. And that worked years ago because there were people coming to the state and businesses were coming to the state and they were prepared to pay it. So for a while, that worked. But that dog isn't hunting the same way that it used to. And the challenge becomes, as our cost tend to increase, that you're finding that, again, and Ms. Rothrock will talk about manufacturing elements, but as you begin to find that you're reached peaks and you're going down in the manufacturing sector, then there are fewer dollars left to play with. I mean, so if I lose a NUMMI plant, that's 6,000 jobs that are gone. If I've got a plant like Solyndra that can't compete because their costs were too high to begin with, notwithstanding the manipulation that they got from the Chinese, but they couldn't compete anyway because their cost structures were too high. If I've got other people who are leaving here because they can't compete, then that means that the revenue to produce, I mean, if the 265 is a national cost. See, the challenge I have with that is where I started earlier. That assumes that I'd buy beluga caviar, and I wouldn't. And so many of these things that are proposed as green jobs, when I look at it from my ghetto economic point of view, it ain't real because it suggests things that I wouldn't buy to begin with. And the other thing that I found, certainly in a number of the regulations, and we'll have a discussion with some of that later, is that it's not clear that you achieve the cleanup that was proposed. So oftentimes the regulation suggests something that when you cut to the chase, you're not going to make it necessarily better anyway. For example, if I looked at the lakes and what have you, it's not clear that most of those lakes or rivers are dirty because of stormwater runoff. There are a variety of things that could have caused that to have occurred, many of which are also being handled in other parts and other kinds of regulations. There were a number of things. Many of the lakes and things that are polluted are such because of natural pollution that occurred that made them unsuitable to begin with. I mean, a lot of people forget, for example, that in Los Angeles County, before there was a metropolis called Los Angeles County, there was smog. The Indians recorded back as far as the 1800s that the basin in Los Angeles created an environment where you always had smog. It wasn't a phenomenon that occurred because of the automobile. It was a phenomenon of the topography of the city. Now, all the cars and people made it worse, to be certain, when you add to what was already there. But there will always be smog in Los Angeles, even if you took all the people away, because of the dust and the nature of where Los Angeles is. And many times what we're trying to do is exact a standard that's unreachable, that ultimately ends up financing people into something that they call a green job. See,
Senator Wright.
If it's not something that I would buy, it ain't a job, it's a cost. If it's something that I would buy, then it's a job.
I think there are 2 points. First, in this case, often we do know the source of the pollution. The State Water Board's Section 303D Clean Water Act list of impaired waters identifies the source of pollution. So to a large extent, for these severely polluted waters, we do have a sense of the source. Secondly, with respect to the jobs, beluga caviar issue, when we talk about low-impact development strategies, these are strategies that are badly needed. So when you characterize them as things that you wouldn't need anyway, I don't know that that's applicable to this. Low-impact development strategies reduce polluted flows. They create local water supplies, which I'm sure everybody in Southern California can agree is badly needed. And they will serve as adaptation buffers to rising sea levels. So these are workhorse strategies that can serve multiple purposes, and they're not a sort of gold standard or pie-in-the-sky type dream. They're hard-working strategies, they're smart, they're cost-efficient, and they have real benefits. And those benefits have been analyzed and reported in numerous reports over the past 5 to 10 years.
Except by the people that have to pay. See, everybody's a Christian as long as somebody else is carrying the cross. When I put that on your shoulder, it changes the dynamic considerably. All I'm saying is that, and again, it's not an argument of do you do X or Y, because clearly you have to do something. I mean, and if I took the Pigovian view of economics, then you say the polluter pays. If you know that Joe Smith is the one polluting the river upstream, then make Joe pay or make Joe leave, whatever that issue might be. I mean, or you come up with a cost for Joe in the Pigovian sense that says that you created this much of a negative externality, therefore we're going to put that cost back to you. The problem that I'm saying is that we're distributing often the cost of the negative externality to people in the sense of Senator Rubio who are unable to pay. And when you do that, what happens is that you exacerbate rather than fix some of the things. So if we said this regulation, for example, the water board regulations that we're describing today, it's not clear after I paid the money that my water would be better. So the only certainty that I have is that my money would be gone. That's the only guarantee that I got, is that I'd be broke. It's not clear, for example, that this is going to make, whether it's 900 million or 300 million or 100 million. Caltrans spends, they said, $150 million today on mitigations. But if it was 150 or we went to 900, it's not clear from the discussion, from the regulations, that it would make Caltrans necessarily any better if they spent 900 million. So the only thing that would happen is that their 900 million would be gone. Maybe we would hire somebody to do more monitoring, but it's not clear that the water is going to get any better. If we said we're going to do these things, that specifically the low impact program that you described, that works assuming that you're doing more development. And much of the area that I represent, we ain't developing nothing, because we're already built out. I mean, I represent an area that there probably aren't 2 acres of undeveloped land in my entire district. So therefore, the build-out strategy, unless I'm going to tear down Inglewood and then redevelop it in a low-impact fashion, I don't have much development left that takes place. That development that does take place, I have to account for water, and I have to do a number of things as a part of new regulations anyway, which by the way, is something that as the builder going forward, you know that's the rule and you comply with it. I'm simply saying is that we have to be careful, and what Senator Gaines, and I'll shut up, and I appreciate you staying, because we're really not trying to make you the human sacrifice, but Senator Gaines raised the point that I think is important when he was talking about extending the regulations. One of the main impediments to jobs, which is what this committee is attempting to review, is uncertainty. If I'm going to build a widget plant in Roseville, I want to have a sense of what my cost per widget is going to be on the regulatory front, as well as on the energy front, on the labor front, and what have you. If you introduce uncertainty into that front, then I'm going to go someplace where the certainty is clearer.
Absolutely, and environmentalists and industrial facilities agree that the current industrial stormwater permit is too confusing. It's not clear what the costs are going to be, and it's not enforceable. Okay. And our organizations are working with the State Water Board to produce a permit that is clear and enforceable and provides some certainty to all parties.
Well, that's good. This is progress, hot damn. So the idea becomes, again, not only do we want to make it clear, but you want to have some longevity with it. You don't want to create an environment where I'm in business today and I operated on what I thought were going to be a set of regulations, and then in 6 months, there's another one that costs me more money. And then in 6 months, there's another one that costs me more money. Because at some point, if I'm in business, I'm a price taker. I don't have the ability to shift the cost that are created to the customer all the time. That's where the Pygovian philosophy of economics falls short, because it assumes that I can continually pass the cost along. Sometimes I can, and sometimes I can't.
But there's another piece of the economic puzzle. If we allow stormwater to run off facilities like today without being treated or cleaned, and it goes into rivers and reservoirs and drinking water supplies, then people in certain areas of the state, which is already happening, have to go and buy bottled water. That's passing the cost off to people. So we can't only look at the economic impact of this to industrial facilities and governments. We have to look at the public health impacts. How many people are going to the hospital from swimming contaminated water or drinking contaminated water? There are many economic costs associated with the fail to regulate and manage our resources.
And one of the things that I think we'll have to do becomes, as we propose the regulations, such as they are, that we need to actually look and see, did the regulations work, right? I mean, for example, we required people to put an additive into gasoline as a regulation. California did it by choice. Some states did, most didn't. Most had better sense than we did. The additive that we mandated go into the gasoline actually impacted water quality. It wasn't the choice of the oil company per se. It was the choice of the regulators in state government. They did that. So that meant that they spent $8 billion for this regulation that didn't work. And then we spent an additional $4 billion to take it out. We also got rid of almost 20% of our refining capacity because they couldn't afford the transition and the cost to make the new gasoline, which now means that we have some of the highest gasoline in the country, which means that if I'm an airplane company, I tanker fuel and I don't buy it here, which means that I now lose $600 million a year in avoided jet fuel taxes. Then on top of that, I lose an additional $400 million in transfer trucks who don't buy diesel fuel here because every one of the interstate highways has a truck stop on it and they buy the diesel fuel from there. So now I'm $1 billion short. Well, hell, if I had that $1 billion, I could give it to him so that he could do the water treatment stuff he's talking about. I'm just saying, at some point, and there's a law that doesn't even require that the water board do an economic analysis. They can, but they don't have to. And up to now, they don't. So as a consequence, we don't even know whether or not what they're proposing works. We're talking about stuff that often, I mean, again, as I look at Seattle and I look at our neighbors around, they ain't doing this. So we're exceeding what everybody else is doing. And
well, I don't think that's true. Earlier, Tom Howard said that we actually look to Washington, which has stronger stormwater regulations, as a model. So
no,
I don't think
trust me. The people at Boeing were about to take the C-17 to Seattle and make it because they could make it for substantially less money. And Seattle doesn't have near the population that we do, and they don't have as much agriculture. They don't have as much agriculture as you do in the San Joaquin Valley. So all I'm saying is that I'm not suggesting at all that Seattle and Washington are not complying with the Clean Water Act. They do. But what those other states have found is that they're able to do it for a whole lot less than we do. I mean, if we just said we're going to be in the group, I just want to stop us from leading with our chin. I mean, in boxing, that usually is not a recipe that's going to let you win the contest. I'm just saying, I mean, that's not to say that you don't do the cleanup. It's not to say that you don't monitor the environment. It's not to say that you don't want to have standards and visions of how you can make it better. I'm saying that much of what's proposed doesn't even make good sense. Ray Charles could see that some of the things proposed there weren't going to work. Therefore, you end up in a situation where, again, the money's gone, the water's still the same as it was, and somebody ended up with a green job. I would contend that that's hustling backwards. If you said to me, if you do this, that this is going to make the water better, count me in. If I'm going to put MTBE in gasoline, that's idiotic. If I'm going to require there to do something in fuel or some of the things that we do that can't be complied with, I can't do that. And when we were experimenting, it was fun because we could play around. But now it's becoming a case where I've got states calling on businesses in California saying, you know what, you should move here because we figured that out a long time ago. I mean, and it's not you individually. I'm saying that we can and should be able to create a system whereby there's a regulatory regime that's stable, consistent, and predictable so that people who come here to make and build stuff know what they're going to have to do. We did that at one time in an environment where we didn't concern ourselves with the cost. I mean, we went through World War II. Again, this would be closer to Mr. Huff and Mr. Dutton's district. But we went through World War II where they used to dump rocket fuel in the ground. I mean, no, and I'm not exaggerating. The Army literally dumped rocket fuel in the ground, and then it would rain, and the rain would percolate down, and the rocket fuel ends up in the aquifer. Absolutely happened. Some of it's Superfund site. In some cases, we're trying to go back and say...
And I'm sure that those dischargers would have argued that that was the only economically feasible way to get rid of that rocket fuel. But it's the state water board's role, and it's the legislature's role to protect the public's health and interests.
Well, at the time, they would have argued that they didn't want to speak Japanese or German. there was something else going on at the time. But I'm just saying, and the challenge for us is that you look at that now, and now we know that that's something that we shouldn't have done. I agree that that's the case. And I agree that we've got to make sure that we monitor the regulations, and we've got to make sure that we make the water better, but we've got to make sure that the regulations work. And if the regulations work and we identify a way to pay for it, that also has to be the thing. We just can't say, this is going to cost you X number of dollars, and you got to pay for it. I'm sorry. I'm going to give you the last word, and I appreciate you're a good sport, and I appreciate. Okay, can you take a question from Senator Dutton?
Just quick, I'm not putting you on a hot spot. This report is for national, right? It's not.
Yes, but there are California numbers in there.
But in the 5 pages you gave us, or
no, but I can provide the whole report. I just didn't want to inundate the.
You gave it. It's online, right?
Yes.
Okay, I can do it.
And I have the figures in front of me if you want them.
No, it's okay. I know you're in a hurry, and I can look it up online. You also, at the beginning of your statements, you were talking about the federal requirements. You used the word practical.
Maximum extent practicable is the legal.
Would you please define for me practical?
Well, it's practicable, and in Senator Wright's.
You know where I'm going. It's what's practical to you may not be practical to me. I'm just curious if did anybody bother to define the word practical in application, as you were referring to it, because you and I may have different definitions of practical.
That's true.
Okay. And then the other thing, too, about that area, and you're right, we've got also fireworks and everything else were produced down there. But the other problem, too, and let me explain to you something that happens, this is somewhat also what's going on in the Central Valley. Down in my area is the Chino area. My wife's a 4th-generation Chino girl, and of course the farm, the dairies down there, they started out with about 35,000 cows, and then they ended up with over 1 million cows. And what ends up happening is that as the cost associated with making a living and stuff increases, you look at ways to expand your market. So what they did is that instead of having a couple of cows, they end up having 3 or 4 cows, and then they get 5 or 6 cows, because as the costs go up and property taxes came in and all the end utility rates go up and all this other stuff, they have to add more cows. Whenever you start adding more cows, you're going to create more natural waste that then the groundwater gets contaminated because of high nitro levels and things like this, because we got so many cows per acre, and now we've seen that explode. But then also what's happening about the only way we can deal with things like perchlorate contamination and the high nitro levels is if we actually are able to put water into the groundwater system, all right? Well, see, right now, they're being stopped down in our area. In-ground storage is kind of a critical thing. We can't put runoff, because they say that that's contaminating that water. And yet I've got to recharge that basin, and the only way I can dilute it to where it's acceptable levels and it's safe is if I do put more water in there. So somehow we're going to have to come up with a balance, a common sense approach here, because once it's pumped back out of there, it's going through a pretty extensive filtration system before it actually gets to the consumer, because this gets filtered again anyway. So I'm not saying what you're saying is wrong. I think there's some good, I'd like to make sure most of this is going to actual building of infrastructure and not just more think tanks, because that doesn't get me there. I don't know, because I haven't seen the details as far as how you're spending your money or how this is recommending it. And that's the reason I was curious about it. But, we might want to give that some thoughts, too, because I don't think anybody's disagreeing with what you're talking about. And right now, down in Southern California, we pay some of the highest water rates of anybody in the name of conservation, because they don't want us using more water. And so somehow you're going to have to give someplace. That's the only comment I got to make.
I mean, we're going to have you in the Central Valley with Senator Rubio, and we'll be working on nitrates, and we can raise the intelligence quotient of the people in the Central Valley.
And I'm also going to come up with a...
No. Excuse me, but one of the discussions was there is a suspicion, correct me if I'm off, I think I understood you to say that there was a question as to whether or not the nitrates were causing intelligence lowering issues.
Yes.
You can't make this stuff up. So So, but I'm just saying. But I think in the aggregate we can work together. The challenge becomes is that we tend to do a lot of it piecemeal. So there's the stormwater, and there's wastewater, and there's different things that ultimately might need to be combined so that you're able to make them more effective. If we were able to use more of the storm runoff water and it was clean enough so that it could be gray water and you could, I think that there are things that we should look at, and we should be more holistic in making sure that we're doing the best that we can with the technologies that we have before us. I think that all begins to make good sense, and everybody's moving forward. The problem becomes again, when the bill comes. And we want to make sure that the bill is equitably distributed so that everybody feels that pain equally. And I appreciate your giving us the time and putting up with crazy people who are here. But again, I got a whole lot of people who are out of work. Rubia, the four of us here have unemployment rates that are higher than many parts of the state. So the challenge for us is to see those things that we're able to do that help people work in areas where we can get a real job. So I appreciate it, recognize what you do, because I can see in LA, between Ballona Creek and LA River, we're better than we were 25 years ago. And the population has increased over the last 25 years. So there's significant progress that, to your credit and the credit of the people that you work with, would not have occurred had you not been there. So I see it, I recognize it, but as we move forward and we're looking at our incremental increases, we want to measure that and make sure that what we're getting over the incremental increase is worth the cost that we're going to pay for. That becomes part of the challenge of what we do.
Thank you. I look forward to working with the committee.
All right, thank you so much. Jim Dor. Oh, Jim.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wright, distinguished committee members. My name is James Simonelli. I'm Executive Director of the California Metals Coalition. I also have the honor to serve as co-chair of the Water Coalition. And for this part of the discussion, I'd like to focus on the industrial permit because that is what impacts our members and the members of the Water Coalition. The Water Coalition is one of the most diverse coalitions here in Sacramento. We've got business, over 100 trade associations representing 20,000 businesses. We have a workforce, labor, over 1.5 million workers, and many of which are from organized labor. Government, you've got local cities and counties that directly and indirectly are impacted by the industrial permit. And the one thing that I haven't heard during all of this discussion is schools. Schools are regulated by the industrial permit, and part of our Water Coalition, we have nearly 500 school districts encompassing 92% of California's children. So when we talk about stormwater and we talk about quote-unquote industrial, we're talking about a very, very diverse, very broad, everything from a small moms and pop shop to the place where our children go to school. The Water Coalition really has a simple goal. We do support the efforts to improve water quality and take reasonable and measured steps towards this goal. And we have a track record because this permit change that we're talking about has been a regulation for 20 years. You have 20 years of investment. You have 20 years of data sampling. You have 20 years of people going out in the rain and collecting rainwater and sending it to labs. I can also confirm, contrary to the slides that we saw this morning, that the stormwater runoff from our industrial facilities do not include things like beach balls and lawn chairs and large bags of trash. Essentially, you're talking about a very thin flow of water that comes off of a site, and that is what is sampled and captured. A lot of our biggest challenges as far as the Water Coalition have been pointed out. The issues of cost, the issue of what is the net impact of jobs, not just what we think are created or what we expect to gain, but what's the net impact of jobs? What is, for this type of permit, based on the benchmarks or the previously proposed limits, is there an establishment to fail? I'll give some examples later of specific facilities and what the impact truly is of stormwater and their sampling. But in many ways, we are setting up our community to fail. So essentially, the Water Coalition has some basic goals. We have some issues that are going. But I think what's really brought us all together today is the process that's led us up to this. We're talking about a permit that is 14 years overdue. We're talking about a permit that has had 14 years of discussion. And I'm reminded by, in my freshman year in college, a professor that put on the front of his door, around it by duct tape, that says, "A lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part." And when I look at what's happened in the last 6 to 8 months, there has been a rush, even though we've had 14 years to do this, a rush to put out a permit, a rush to review this permit, a rush to push everybody to get their comments in 1 and 2 minutes in, and it's created essentially why we're all here today. And, you know, I'll quote one of the things that we received as the business community during this process. It was at the bottom of a email from the State Water Board. It says, "Please be advised that State Water Board staff may not discuss the proposed revisions until the new draft is published." And this was in July. And so we were directly told we can't talk to staff. We know what happens with ex parte. We can't talk to the board. We can't talk to the executive officers. There's a void of communication. And in a business, an economy that's as unstable as it is, that uncertainty is what I think you're seeing brewing here. So I wanted to point out those things because it's essential to this larger water coalition. As far as bringing it a larger scope down to specifics, my organization, the California Metals Coalition, is in manufacturing. We actually make stuff here in the state of California. There's about 6,000 facilities that do the metal work, representing 250,000 employees. And those employees that we employ, 8 out of 10 of those employees are considered ethnic minorities. 8 out of 10 are considered to be in communities of concern. These are living wages, health benefits to communities that really need these jobs. And so some specifics about the impact of this draft and the impact of stormwater. Based on the draft of our facilities, we looked at in the first year between $10,000 and $12,000 impact per company, which translates into between $48 million and $72 million per year in costs. And for manufacturers, stormwater for us is a non-revenue generating source of activity. And when you look at those dollars that would go towards that, you're talking about money that doesn't go towards investing or towards hiring people. Even more specific, one of the benchmarks that our industry has to measure is zinc. And zinc is a constituent that, a constituent that's measured in the stormwater. Less than 1% of our industry processes zinc, yet over 50% of our industry cannot pass the benchmark for zinc. And the reason because of that is because we have metal roofs, we have metal gutters, we have cars that drive on our property and drive off of our property. And so we have facilities that they could shut down for 3 weeks, 4 weeks that can't pass the benchmarks and hence proposed as limits at one point that are proposed. And so you have the cost of exceeding those limits, which for the second year for our industry would be somewhere around $150 to $200 million. And then by the third year, once you get into engineering controls, just to capture the gutter rain that's coming off, you're talking about $250 million just for our industry based on what you saw as a draft permit. So I think as you look at individual sites and individual companies, both in the small and macro sense, you throw in schools, you throw in cities, you throw in Caltrans, you have a significant portion of the state of California, I would argue representative of every legislator in California, that's impacted by this issue of when it rains, somebody has to scoop it up. And I think, you know, the further we can analyze and look into these things, the better. So going from here, I think a few things have come out that I'd like to suggest. One is to fix the ex parte. We need to talk to that water board, and I think that can be a legislative fix. I think that we need to look into the cost-benefit analysis, because this issue of not doing it at all because it's quote-unquote a permit, when we all know at the end of the day this is essentially a new regulation change, is something that needs to be addressed and could be addressed legislatively. And at the end of the day, I think we need to continue, because again, a 14-year span of waiting for a new permit, when essentially the state and the State Water Board, they are not under a federal mandate to adopt something different that's in place right now. They are mandated to review and to look at it again, but not mandated to do what they're proposing. And so I think reining back in all of these things, and reining with the REIGN, or REIN, should be the focus of everything. So on behalf of the Water Coalition and the California Metals Coalition, we thank you for holding this. It's significantly important for jobs and everything that we're focusing on. I'll obviously be around for questions, but Dorothy is also here as well to give some comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members. My name is Dorothy Rothrock. I'm with the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, and I'm going to try not to repeat anything that's been said, which is hard because I think we've covered the landscape here. We all know the economy's in bad shape, especially for manufacturers, and it's very crucial at this time that we be sending a very strong message to the investment community that California is a safe place to come and explore putting new money to work. We've been named the worst place to do business 7 years in a row by CEO Magazine. Now, particularly when we're trying to go somewhat beyond federal law, it's important to show those outside potential investors that the certainty that they want to hear is that we're going to do things that make sense, that if it's going to be a cost, there's going to be a benefit that's going to justify that cost. That's the kind of certainty they need. They need the certainty that the regulators are going to make sense. They also need the certainty that they're going to be able to have adequate opportunity to provide input to those regulators. And getting to this ex parte issue, we really think the board is hiding behind a rule that they don't need to hide behind in this regard. They've chosen to make this process a quasi-judicial. They don't need to. They could treat it legislatively. In fact, I think that the issue of determining what federal law means, maximum extent practicable, is a legislative issue. It looks like to me, I'm not an expert, but probably science, economics, technology, all sorts of things would be involved in determining what's practical. That's a very policy-driven decision, needs lots of analysis and thought. That's legislative, and we should have access to the board to discuss that, and the ex parte rule is not legitimate. I suggest, just to close, I said I'd be quick. I don't want to be sacrificed. I think Ted Gaines, Senator Gaines, had a good idea about sticking with the permit as it is. Let's start work today on a process that may take a few years to get it right. We took a couple years to do the scoping plan for AB 32. I don't think this is any smaller than that. They're still implementing AB 32. This is something, and there was huge public process. I can fault CARB for a lot of things, but I don't fault them for the public process. That's the kind of effort that the State Water Board needs to put into this process. Thank you very much.
Questions from other senators?
In listening to all this, there's just a tremendous challenge we have, and I agree that we should have a collaborative and a process that weighs the economic impacts of the decisions we're making. It's not lost on me that while Senator Wright, Mr. Chairman, talked about the air in L.A. County, we have a better, probably a more viable illustration, and all the water that went into the ocean was potable at one time. But we weren't around to create salty, and it's got a little bit of everything in there. And some of the requirements that we have here to clean it up would make rainwater suspect in areas where it's coming down through some of the pollution. So now we're going to be responsible cleanup, even to the level of polluted nature. I think this stuff really deserves a strong look at it. We can't be pricing ourselves out of business. We will absolutely be, looking for the last person to turn the lights out. We can have the cleanest water around. We have the cleanest air around. We can have nobody around to enjoy them. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, could you kind of elaborate? You made a reference to a quasi-legislative versus quasi-judicial. Could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, in fact, staff did a real good job of outlining this in the report here. If the board is working on a quasi-legislative matter, then communications back and forth can be very freely accomplished. If it's judicial, it's considered more like, well, it's a case in controversy. You've got a particular party and a particular compliance issue, and it's not appropriate for the parties to be talking to the judge off around the side. So the permits are rather strange because they're a permit to operate, which sounds kind of individual, but in fact it covers dozens and dozens, hundreds of different facilities, of different types of folks, as James did a good job describing. So it's a little bizarre that it's in that kind of a framework for analysis or the process for communicating with the board when it has this broad application. It is, in fact, a regulation that should be governed by the type of regulatory process rules that we have in the APA. And the fact that it's not governed by the APA is kind of a strange aberration, I think, of what California law should be for the State Water Board.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? I want to do two things. Mr. Watson, thank you for staying. And as you open, but I want to give you the last word because a number of people have made descriptions. So if you had a closing comment, I wanted to give you that before we went to public. I called you Watson. Excuse me, Mr. Howard. I'm sorry. I called you Watson. I apologize. I'm old. When you get old, you'll make mistakes too.
Excused.
But as the group, I mean, you started off, and the number of people that said things, and I appreciate you being here because I hate it sometimes when people say stuff about me and then I don't get to respond. I want to, and in my business it happens all the time, so I'm used to it. But I try not to do that to other folk. But I wanted to give you the last word in the witness panel.
Oh, well, thank you. Actually, I don't really have much in the way of a response. What I've heard is what the board heard during their workshops. It's what the comments that we received indicated. It's why the Water Board is doing a substantial redraft of the permits right now and is going to go through another whole process of comment and public hearings and public workshops to discuss the new draft permits when they come out. As I said, I think the first thing I started was that the comments in summary was that this was too much, too fast, and at a time when the economy, and too expensive, at a time when the economy can't afford it. And the Water Board, well, I'll speak only for myself, and I agree with that, and that's why we're in the process of going through this again.
I would hope, I know the holiday time are busy for a lot of folk. I would hope we would perhaps look at a time at the beginning of the year and kind of start fresh so that we don't end up where there's something where people said, I didn't know they were meeting on Christmas Eve or something, something to that effect. I would hope as well, I will have our Ledge Council people look at the rules vis-a-vis the ex parte judicial versus the other thing. I don't purport to be an expert in the water side. I do know the rules at the PUC once there is a proceeding that it takes on that process because they are judicial and we'll have to make what could in effect be a judicial finding. And there's often, in their case, an administrative law judge who's hearing the matter, and then that administrative law judge is going to refer it back to the entire commission. So theirs is a little different than yours in that regard. That's why I was talking about the differences. But I think some of this could be made less cumbersome if the affected parties, and including the environmental folks, if everybody had an opportunity to sit at the table, the real parties of interest and I would contend some of the environmental groups are real parties of interest as well because, it's their, cash cow that we're talking about. So if everybody who had an interest had an opportunity to fit in, if we could look at that. As well, I think we should begin looking at the cost-benefit analysis. I understand that Senator Scheer's bill kind of exempted you from having to do that. But, I mean, just because that's there doesn't mean that it's a good idea. And I think that we might want to begin looking at just some of the analysis. I mean, I looked at a regulation, that was going to cost an inordinate amount of money for a 3% increase in benefit. And I don't think that it was clear to everyone that we were talking about a 3% increase. It was a carb rate. At some point, you might say, 3% is not even something that you'd be able to measure going out. So I think as well going forward, I'm just kind of a plain guy. We'd like to know as we look at the regs specifically what they do in terms of improving the water. It might be that it's a tactic, but I hope that what we're able to demonstrate is that the regs that are going to come out are going to have a demonstrable impact on the water quality, so that we're not just saying we just raised all these rates, but the water's still the same as it was. I know, again, in Southern California, we're working on our beat stuff, and we're putting filters and booms and a number of things in those channels and canals that feed into other waterways in the oceans. But I would hope that we would begin looking at the cost, the benefit. The word Mr. Arp used is sustainability in a fashion that's normally not used in this context, to see that it works. So I appreciate that. Look forward to working with you again. We'll have some notes that we'll come back to you with, and I hope we're able to get together again, because I'd like to think that at the end of the day, we all have the same purpose, which would be to increase the quality of life for the residents of California. And starting from that purpose and moving forward, I think we can achieve better water and a quality of life and have people have jobs. Because I can assure you that your quality of life is severely impacted if you ain't got no job. And so our challenge is, how do we keep the economy growing in a way that provides the revenue to do much of the things that we're talking about doing? And I don't think that they're mutually exclusive between the environment and doing that. But we just want to make sure that the things we're doing actually produce real value. So I appreciate you being here, and I know you could have been, for 3 hours. I privilege and thank you, sir, for your time and being here, and in some cases being the person that we beat up, and then in other cases I welcome and actually say thank you for that work that you do, because there's a real need to make sure that we deal with storm runoff water. And someone who looks at that and has been working in that as you have, we appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Senator.
All right. We're going to open up. If there's a public comment that someone has, we'll take those. And if you see an open microphone or seat, please come forward and take it, and we'll keep going.
Mr. Chairman, members, Josh Pane on behalf of the California Refuse Recycling Council, a 50-year-old council of recycling companies, the original scavenging companies. So we do a substantial amount of environmental work in the state. One of the issues, we're happy to hear that the board from Mr. Howard today is looking at the best management practices rather than the numeric limits. But in the existing regulation, and this has been brought up, so wanted to bring it up to your attention. In the existing regulations, there are issues of lawsuits. In existing regulations. Our organization and many of our members have been the recipients of these lawsuits. The lawsuits, in our estimation, seem to be in the frivolous range. It seems that certain parties, certain law firms, and certain environmental groups are using some of what is today in the regulation to file these frivolous lawsuits on folk in our industry that are attempting to do the very best job. So we'd like the legislature to look at the possibility of the law and how it affects. If there's a way to do it with, for example, the ADA. The legislature passed a revision to the federal law that the legislature had the authority to on the ADA that allowed a company to begin the process and not be susceptible to a lawsuit, to begin the process of fixing its ADA compliance. We'd like to urge the legislature to see if that same type of law could be applied here, that if a company is in the process of complying, that then that company, there would be no lawsuit possible at that point.
Let me, to move forward, if you would give us a little bit of what you have, if you'd get that to staff, and I'm going to take a chair's prerogative and thank Catherine Agard and Paul Donahue from my staff, and I forgot the gentleman's name from Mr. McCarthy on the Republican side. Let me thank, in fact, and ask to say thank all of you for putting the hearing together and the work that went in, and I forgot to do that earlier on. Let me as well thank the sergeants who were here. I mean, everybody could have been doing something else today other than listen to us talk, so I appreciate all the staff time that went into making this work. But Mr. Parnay, if you would get that to Paul, we would probably want to look at that as an outcome of what we had as a hearing. Senator
Yes,
Dutton.
we would do that, Senator.
I've just had some experience with what's going on with the ADA fix supposedly that took place. Unfortunately, we've never implemented it. Oh. It was put into effect back in 2008. We've got businesses right now being sued out in Redlands and so forth. I just put in a bill to try to have a 120-day stay on lawsuits until it could be fixed, and they couldn't even get it out of the first committee. And the reason was because they said about the 2008 fix that was put into effect, the problem is it hasn't been implemented. And there has been somebody that's actually gone through the certification process that's still being sued. And part of the other challenge is that even if we fix it at the state level, they just walk across the street and file those same lawsuits into the federal courts. So that would be the other thing we'll need to take a look at. So.
Well, we know that it has had some effect on the ADA side. You can see them in Windows now. It says ADA compliance under progress. If we could get just something simple to allow companies that are trying to do its very best job to clean the water coming off of its plant, while that's happening, if we could just have some semblance of order so that we don't have these lawsuits, that would be helpful. So we'll get that to you, Senator.
Get us something to work with.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, let me take this gentleman here who's standing up, sir. Why don't you take that microphone right there?
Hello, my name is Stephen Desjardins, and I'm a business owner in Roseville, California. And so we've heard a lot from legislative and representatives. How about a business owner? As an owner of a restaurant, these regulations actually regulate me as a tenant of a building to do things outside my building as a tenant and into a parking lot that has a separate ownership. And so when I'm actually down here on a day like today talking about stormwater affecting a restaurant, I think we know how far away we've gone with this regulation. I'm also a real estate developer. I've developed in Roseville for 25 years now, and my last project I got approved in the city of Auburn got the Smart Growth Award from the Sierra Club, which they don't hand out a great deal. So I'm pretty happy with the
How much did that cost you?
Yeah, just calling up and talking to them. Absolutely nothing, sir.
Okay.
And the point is I could call and talk to them. When I came here in '87, I did the first permits for vernal pools and for wetland creation. I could call up and talk to Kay Goody at Fish and Wildlife Service. I can talk to Tom Coe at the Corps of Engineers. I could talk to the EPA. I could talk to Fish and Wildlife. I can't talk to Water Quality Control Board. I will tell you right now, I, as a developer, can't construct now because it's raining. The last time the permit was updated, I hired engineers and people who certified by their course to design a program. The answer is they couldn't give me a program because there's no event that they specify. So when you have a regulating body that's not responsive to me as a business owner, to me as a developer, me as a citizen, or you as our ultimate regulating body, we have a recipe for disaster. So I want to echo the ability to talk to the body. There's probably, I'm going to guess, after having done this for a while, there's probably 2 people who are writing this stuff who have never even talked to a business owner or someone like myself to collaborate. I got through creation of vernal pools, for heaven's sakes. I was able to collaborate with the regulators. That collaboration is key. Right now, stormwater is so far out of control, and as we look at anything else, please look at it in conjunction with the other permits already in place. In Roseville, again, we don't have beach balls by the beach, don't have a beach, and we already have things to deal with this. We have detention basins, retention basin that deals with the energy. We have stormwater interceptors, parking lots and things. So why on earth are we going more to spend another 100% for a 1/10% benefit?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
What I'm going to do, sir, I'm going to ask you to take that one, and if I could, I'm going to take the people who are standing. So if you would line up on the standing mics, and I'll take the seated people last, just because you're more comfortable than they are. But okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. I know the hour is late. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, number one, for having this hearing on this very important issue. My name is Ian Padilla, and I'm with the Coalition for Adequate School Housing. We represent over 500 districts and about 92% of school kids on school facilities and maintenance issues. I did want to mention we are also part of the Water Coalition and the statewide Stormwater Coalition as well. We share many common concerns. To be brief, CASH has 3 primary concerns. One is the cumulative impact of all 3 of or all the permits. That's something that hasn't been discussed here. The construction permit is already left the stable, so I'm not going to bring it up here. But that's something that we're very concerned about. Certainly, the other one is the inclusion of numerics in some of the permits, particularly the industrial permit. That's a very difficult prohibition, and most above all is the cost implications for schools of all these. I'll spare you my long bullet point list of what's happened to schools in the last 3 years. You know very well. It's a very difficult time, but I will say that every dollar that goes to a non-educational requirement is a dollar that doesn't go to educating kids. I mean, I think that's a difficult logic to ignore. We have some technical concerns on the municipal permit. I won't bring that up. We're going to work with staff on that one, but our real concern is the industrial permit. We think the confusion created by the complexity of the numeric-based approach is going to get us into a situation of perpetual noncompliance, and I think we see that's a common statement. We're also concerned about some other issues, monitoring requirements, maybe a need for more flexibility in the training requirements. The prohibition on group monitoring. Some of the schools, particularly county offices of education, it's more efficient for them to do that, and so they would like that option. The industrial permit, there's some question, well, why do schools care about this? Under the permits, it basically applies to schools that operate school bus maintenance yards, and we have estimated that the cost per site will be about $30,000 to about $130,000, something like that. Now, it's important to understand that that's would be, we think, the cost of complying with a permit. But if corrective action triggers are triggered, the cost of mitigation could be significantly more. So in conclusion, and we did give staff our letter that went to the board, we urge the Water Board to be measured and reasonable as we go forward. I think that's a common theme. I was somewhat encouraged by the statements of Mr. Howard with regard to some of that, and unfortunately, as currently drafted, we don't think that the industrial permit is either measured or reasonable, and we are ready to work with the board on issues going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, members, and staff. My name is Nicolina Hernandez on behalf of CAPA, the California Association of Port Authorities, which is comprised of the state's 11 commercial and publicly owned seaports. We submitted a letter to the board back in April and provided that letter to your staff as well. So we just want to say that we have concerns and we look forward to working with them and others to address them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan Rohan. I'm the Vice Mayor for the City of Roseville. I want to thank you very much for having this hearing today.
You guys are well represented today.
Your efforts to examine the impacts of state regulation on the California economy is timely and critical. As Kelly McKinney stated, our cities support the effort to maintain and improve water quality. However, the goal of improving water quality must be balanced. The State Water Resources Control Board must account for cost in any regulatory effect, cost to local governments, and more importantly, the cost to our local economies. The best way to do this is to require that a cost-benefit analysis, along with input from all stakeholders, be a part of any permit or regulatory writing process. As was stated earlier, this will help the State Water Resources Control Board prioritize which permit provisions will result in good progress toward improving the state's water quality without bankrupting local governments and driving more small businesses to shut their doors and cut jobs. I am also very concerned to hear about the lack of effort by the Water Resources Control Board to provide adequate outreach to the businesses that will be affected by this draft stormwater permit. This alone is cause for alarm and underscores the inherent flaws of how these stormwater permits are written and adopted. Senior management and the council at the City of Roseville asks staff to work with other affected municipalities to elicit change on the draft Phase 2 permit. This effort has resulted in the creation of a statewide stormwater coalition. Coalition members over 60 strong have taken notice and are saying that this permit process is flawed. The permit is not very well thought out, and the results of the permit will be devastating. Severe cuts to core general fund services, failed businesses, and/or businesses that flee California for a more friendly business environment, fewer jobs, all of which will add to our state's continuing problems. With the good work by your committee today and in the future, we are hopeful that some balance will be restored to the state's regulatory permit processes. The stakes are very high, and inaction will not serve California and its economy well. Again, the City of Roseville thanks the committee for seriously looking at this issue, and we look forward to the committee's recommendations, possible future reform legislation, and other actions to promote constructive change within the state's regulatory system that will stem the tide of businesses leaving our state. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for having this hearing. I'm Lori Chen with Clean Water Action. We wanted to bring forth the notion that preventing the pollution to begin with is probably the most cost-effective way, and to include that approach and to understand that any cost-benefit analysis would need to look at impacts beyond the direct impacts, the secondary health impacts, and the impacts to communities that are often least capable of dealing with the pollution, the agricultural communities that don't have the resources to deal with the nitrates. All those impacts on those communities are even greater because they don't have the resources to deal with the public health issues that they're incurred.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Senator. Trudy Hughes with the California League of Food Processors and co-chair of the Water Coalition. And I just want to thank you and the rest of the senators here for helping us on this issue and for giving us an ear. We want to acknowledge the fact that the State Water Board has come to the table, and we have met with staff, and we are hopeful that the revised draft coming out will address some of our issues. That being said, a lot of the discussions we're having are happening on the back end. We would really like to be able to have these discussions up front with the State Water Board so that we can maybe put some work groups together and deal with these issues on the front end, so that we're not in this panic at the end and dragging these folks in front of you and whatnot. So we're really hopeful that out of this we can get some reform so that we can have some meaningful water quality benefits that come out of this entire process. Again, I work for the League of Food Processors. We have 160,000 direct jobs, permanent jobs in the state of California. Our industry has an employment factor of 5.5. That means for every one direct job that we create in our industry, That creates 5 more. We want to be able to not just retain that number, but expand that number. And food processing and agriculture in the state of California doesn't have the luxury of simply moving to Arizona. We have to comply, we have to stay in the state of California. We have one of the most robust agricultural producing areas in the world. And when we put these types of onerous burdens on the industry, it certainly impacts the price of food. It impacts our ability to compete both nationally and internationally. So again, thank you for the opportunity to present our case here today, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to continue to dialogue with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate very much the hearing. I'm Tom Jacob. I'm here on behalf of the Chemical Industry Council of California. I'd just like to endorse the comments that have been made about the industrial permit and to express particularly a concern with a process that would have allowed this permit to be put forward in the first place with such extreme concerns about it. We really do need a process that finds a way to get the interests, all the interests, front-end loaded so that we don't have to arrive at such a difficult stage, and we can get a meaningful process and meaningful permit that we can all stand behind and move forward with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair and members, Jerry Desmond, representing the Metal Finishing Associations of Southern and Northern California, approximately 200 members. We're part of the Water Coalition, and just add one point to one of the elements that is of great concern to us, and I believe about 25 other industries that have group monitoring programs. For 14 years, we've had an ability to have a program with a group leader that helps the small businesses that we are, many ours, others are, as well as the school districts, for monitoring, inspection, reporting, and sampling so that they can comply and not have to spend the kind of resources they would have to as small businesses individually. We understand the first draft would eliminate the group monitoring programs. We understand the second draft is probably going to eliminate them as well. We have not had any collaborative working group type of environment to bring this issue up. We're hopeful that that could occur, but we think that with your leadership and direction, maybe that could take place.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dawn Kepke with McEwen Associates on behalf of the State of California Auto Dismantlers Association. SCADA is the statewide trade association for the auto dismantling and recycling community in California. We are also a member of the Water Coalition, share the concerns voiced by the coalition and our members. We're specifically concerned about the challenges with compliance and costs associated with the permit and any future permits. Our members participate in a Partners in the Solution program. It's an award-winning program that we've worked with state, federal, as well as local entities to craft, that essentially provides requirements for our members to meet along environmental standards, including stormwater compliance. And our members are some of the best actors out there. Absent the ability to have a workable, cost-effective permit, we're highly concerned that our members will be subject to lawsuits and third-party actions that would essentially put these mom-and-pop entities out of business and ultimately push some of the cars that and vehicles that are currently in the salvage market to those that are kind of in the underground economy, the unregulated, non-compliant operators, which obviously, as we can all understand, would have significant and worse impacts for the environment. So we appreciate you holding this hearing and look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you. If you would get us some, just a page of some of the issues that are unique to the auto dismantling business, if you just get that to staff, it would be appreciated.
Absolutely, will do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is John Berg. I'm with the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association, and we represent the, besides the ocean liners, the marine terminal operators that facilitate international trade in California. I'll be brief. We share essentially the same concerns that the other stakeholders raised today. We are encouraged that the Water Board is addressing some of these issues, and we look forward to seeing what those changes will be. We also are very appreciative of your efforts, the committee's efforts, and we would encourage that you continue the oversight and vigilance on this issue, both yourselves and the entire legislature, because this is a huge issue for for our industry, and I obviously most all industries in California.
Let me ask as well if there are some things that are unique to the maritime. In my district, I have the Port of Los Angeles, so maritime issues are serious to us. And between my longshoremen and the truckers that come in and out and the goods that are moved through the Port of Los Angeles, there's a significant economic factor. So if there are some specific concerns to that aspect that you're involved in, if you could as well get that to staff.
I'd be happy to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. Tony Francois from the Western States Petroleum Association. I want to second many of the comments that have already been made, and if I can just briefly encourage the committee's interest in, if necessary, legislation to address the problem with ex parte contacts. Very briefly, the senators who are here today now know far more about our concerns than the members of the Water Board do. And if you just contemplate for a moment, typically when you've heard from us, you would go to them to find out what the issues are. They can come to you now and find out what our concerns are because we've been able to talk to you. The other thing that is a corollary to the board's determination that this is a quasi-judicial proceeding is that they should be expected then to hold an evidentiary hearing at which each permitted entity's concerns could be heard. And that's certainly not the process that they use, and I don't think anybody would reasonably expect that to be done. This is quite clearly under the government code a regulation or a regulatory process, not an adjudicative process. And if that needs to be clarified in statute, we would encourage the committee's interest in that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Todd Blumstein for the Southern California Contractors Association. Senator Wright, you spoke earlier about the uncertainty for business. Just today, Bloomberg published an actual graph that charts uncertainty for business. It's very, very interesting to take a look. But on behalf of SCCA, we are members of a construction organization. Acronym is KICWIC. I don't know exactly what the acronym stands for, but they've been very, very involved with the construction permit. One point on the merits, it has, not to be confused, but the construction general permit, as I understand it, has been implemented on September 2nd. So I wanted to make that abundantly clear. Two issues that have come up. One, there's training that's required for the designers that design the project, and then there's also requirements for the practitioners, the one that actually tests. We are very, very we're very, very short on enough QSPs. There's not enough out there right now for the existing construction projects if the construction industry recovers, actually when it recovers. One final note from somebody that's been working in and outside the building for 15 years now. I see a lot of veteran legislators, a lot of veteran staff here. One of the main roles of the legislature is to oversee the executive body. I don't think there's enough of that going on in this building right now. And really, I don't know how to do this, but to somehow shift that knowledge from the veteran legislators to the newer members is dramatically important, so that as these issues progress and as veteran legislators turn out, you've got a new batch to come in and follow the process. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Wright and members of the committee, my name is Wendy Gehrig, and I'm here on behalf of the Roseville Chamber of Commerce, 1,200 members, two of which are with us today, just to encourage you to direct the State Water Board to engage with the business community and have us participate in the discussions and be proactive instead of reactive. We'll find a lot better solutions, so appreciate the time today.
All right, thank you. Why don't I start with you, sir?
Good afternoon. My name is Randall Friedman on behalf of the United States Navy. The military in California represents direct...
We were talking about you earlier.
Well, we represent direct expenditures in the state of some $57 billion a year. We share the concerns that have been expressed in terms of process and cost. We, too, have been unable to talk to the State Board staff on this permit, even though we'd like to, even though the aspects of these various permits can have a profound impact on our ability to do our national security mission in the state. So we would certainly welcome your involvement and oversight, and again, just welcome a revision. We believe that there really does need to be a pause in this process to take all this information in and everyone follow through with a comprehensive look at the overall stormwater issue, and we certainly are willing to participate in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Wright, and fellow honorable members of the committee. My name is Ermina Kareem. I'm the president and CEO of the San Luis Obispo Chamber of Commerce and our 1,400 small business members and the thousands of people they employ in our region. Hope you'll bear with me today. I came up, this is my first time testifying at the state level, and we're here because we're frankly terrified of really the undetermined price tag of regulations that have undetermined benefit. Let me make sure you're clear that our chamber doesn't fight regulation for regulation's sake. In fact, the number one point in our 6-point economic strategy is proactively protecting and enhancing San Luis Obispo's quality of life with objectives like protecting our signature landscapes, our creeks and riparian habitats, opposing activities that will harm our regional environment, and many other priorities that we believe will foster our prosperity. Our chamber back in the early 90s fought offshore oil drilling. We helped lead the preservation of some 27 miles of California coastline, greater than the size of San Francisco. And we helped lead our city to be the first to ban indoor smoking in the world. So we're really proud of that record. And I share this because I think it provides some context, unless you're a smoker. Sorry. Okay. We certainly understand reasonable regulation, but what is being proposed is far-reaching, unrealistic, and unreasonable, and has no significant proven benefit that we have yet heard. We have supported the City of San Luis Obispo in its stormwater management program, which was put into place about 2 years ago, that has so far removed over 1 million tons of sediment and debris from our stormwater system and has removed about 100,000 tons of trash from our creek. These programs are slow specific. They're reasonable and they're working, and we know this because in last year's winter storms, we had no reported flooding. It currently costs our city about $750,000 to implement it. Our city anticipates that these costs will double to nearly $2 million due to the significantly expanded scope of businesses that will be needed to inventory, monitor, and regulate. And that doesn't even begin to address the implementation costs that our local businesses will bear, from costly retrofitting to training and monitoring. This kind of additional burden, as we've heard from so many speakers today, could and will probably make the difference for businesses that have been fighting to keep their doors open over the last few years through the recession. They don't have the staff or the money to comply. And why is that? In our membership alone, 60% of our members have 5 or fewer employees. 80% have 20 or fewer. They are the smallest of the small businesses. They represent the bulk of net job creation over the last decade. They are the engine that we are hoping is going to pull us out of this beleaguered economy, but they have little to no idea of what is coming. They're just focused on running their business, and their voice hasn't been at the table in this process that we've all been discussing. They will be the ones who are sacrificed. They will become an additional burden to the state, and all they want to do is work. It's astounding that through this process, economic analysis has not been considered. In our personal lives and in our businesses, we don't have that luxury. The costs and the opportunity costs must be considered so that in our state, in our local regions, we can actually act like we want to help our residents, our businesses, our entrepreneurs be successful here. Government, as you've already noted, doesn't create jobs, but it certainly can get in the way and harm their creation. So I'm encouraged, as I know others are, about some of the things that have been pointed out today, that the process will change, hopefully, that there's going to be a plan to engage a broader shareholder base. We look forward to a new draft that gets rid of costly expectations like retrofit requirements, that prioritizes the scope of targeted businesses, and most importantly, meaningfully engages the business community so that we can achieve a common goal of better water quality. Our businesses look forward to being at the table and to an enhanced process. Thank you for hearing my comments today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate you having us here, Senator Wright and members of the committee. My name is Eric Justison. I'm the president of a small business in San Luis Obispo. We employ 70 people in our architecture, engineering, and planning firm. Our firm over the years, this last 3 years, has suffered greatly in this downturn. And I'd like to offer up the following comments, from our perspective at the table here, which has been severely lacking. I am pleased with what I've heard today in the testimony from many people, including the public sector, and quite frankly, this permit has created some strange bedfellows in that I'm testifying at the same hearing as many of our affiliates in the local government arena. I'm concerned with the process and a complete lack of public outreach and education to the general business community. It is pathetic. I've never seen anything worse, and quite frankly, as we stand here today, I can guarantee you that most of the small businesses in this state have zero idea of what's going on. Less than zero. In fact, I serve on the chamber board. I'm a member of ULI. I'm a member of the Engineering Society of California, and it's going to hit these businesses over the head. They don't even know what's coming. So outreach and education is absolutely fundamental and critical. With regard to economic impacts, well, let's just say it like it is. Regulation flows downstream. It goes from the feds to the state to small businesses, and it ends up on our balance sheet. That's where it comes from. So while I'm somewhat pleased that municipalities are prevented from passing these costs on through fees, regulations, and taxes because of Proposition 214 and others, at the end of the day, it's going to end up coming out of our pocket. So the cost of regulating this is going to be expensive for us down the road. Beyond that, the cost of making these improvements that have been outlined, and hopefully we won't have to comply in the timeframes that are suggested, they're going to cost tens of thousands of dollars. You've heard from other industry experts, from the port authorities, but from the small business perspective, it's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. We've laid off, as I said, about half of our staff. We're struggling to stay in business. They're good jobs. They're head of household jobs. They're jobs that support families in this state. And, now we're struggling to kind of keep our footing, regain the business. And the reason I drove up here from San Luis Obispo is because you hardly probably ever hear from someone like me who's just fighting for our jobs. As Ermina said, most of the jobs in this state come from small businesses, 2/3 of them. And, there is not a real good voice for these industries and businesses. So at the end of the day, do we support water quality and improvements? Absolutely. It's a good thing to do. I'm in the business that does that. But the question is how to best accomplish this goal. I think we've heard a lot of good testimony today about how we can do it, but in the review of this draft permit, it lacks the fundamental elements necessary to meet these goals, first and foremost being education. So what I would suggest here is you stop this business straight away. You put it on a different track completely. You create a process that gives flexibility to the permittees, that's the cities and municipalities, to be able to best implement these practices. And as you've heard, many of the permits that are ongoing are creating fantastic advances in water quality at reasonable, cost-effective prices. So we need a permit that makes surgical adjustments to existing known and effective regulations where incremental changes are implemented to maximize their effectiveness and to minimize the costs. What we don't need, what we can't afford, and what won't improve water quality is this broad and ineffective shotgun approach which badly misses the mark. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair and Senators, Tim Schott on behalf of the San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit District, or BART. BART has a fairly specific concern that we'd like to raise, and that is that in the MS4 permit, in the original draft, or the first draft anyway, transit properties were included as new non-traditional sources. We recognize that in the most recent draft that has been changed, but they are still possibly categorized under the permit itself in the heavy rail transit category. And we're concerned that any time during the permit process, the state board or local regional water quality management districts could draw BART into the permit process. So first concern there. It would be very and perhaps prohibitively expensive for BART to retroactively apply the requirements of the MS4 permit along their 104 miles of track, 44 stations, which for the most part are 40 or more years old. and it would be an incredible burden on BART and obviously have to just be passed on at some point to the riders of the system. So we're concerned about the cost of the retroactive application on the system. BART does currently administer their stormwater through the construction general permit process and also for an industrial general permit for their maintenance facilities. And we believe those programs are managed well by BART. Pardon me. We were most concerned, frankly, that we weren't invited or involved in the stakeholder permit process to the extent that I think you've heard this from a lot of folks, but very concerned with the communication, the process itself, and the inability to participate in it. We are hopeful, and we would suggest that the heavy rail transit agency category be dropped entirely this round, and that as we talk about the permit renewal in the next 5-year round, BART would be more than happy to come to the table and discuss how that could be best be implemented.
Mr. Shah, if you would make sure we just get a copy of that specific if we don't already have it.
Yes, sir. We did submit a couple days ago BART's full letter that went to the Water Board. It's long, about 10 pages. Happy to come in and chat with you about it further.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate you holding the hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Wright and committee. My name's Ken Denayo. I'm owner of Denayo's Roseville Farmers Market and Auction, one of the other business people that have come here from Roseville. Honestly, a lot of the other people have said what I was going to say, but I just want to be sure and make one point clear. For my facility, I cover 70 acres in Roseville. I have 10 outlets, storm drains on my property. My initial review and looking at doing BMPs to convert those is anywhere from $200,000 to $350,000 an outlet. And I know that the city threw out, their 2.5 million plus to monitor the permit and program. The one thing that did come out of that was that all the property owners in Roseville that have storm drains on their property are responsible to retrofit those if it went on under the way the draft plan was first written. Now, I understand it's being rewritten, and I think one of your prime comments is the uncertainty as a business person that I have. I mean, I can't move forward. I can't do any improvements until I know what I'm supposed to do. And my business as a swap meet is actually a small business generator for the area that I live in. We are the ones where mom and pop businesses come in, and if they have an idea for product, merchandise, they can come in on a short-term basis, market their product, see if it works for them, and then they go out into brick and mortar stores. Is what I've seen in the last couple of years is a lot of the brick and mortar stores are coming back into my marketplace because they can't make it out there. And I see this as just another nail in the coffin of business in the state of California, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to at least have my input on it. I was really unaware of what was going on until the city of Roseville came to me and said, hey, you need to get involved in what's going on with the stormwater permit. And I will be involved from this point on. But I just wanted to sort of put a face to a small business, because I know you get a lot of people that represent business organizations and stuff. But I am a business person that will actually be impacted by this. which would affect all the small businesses that.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Let me say before we adjourn that we're going to prepare a communication. I think we've certainly got at a minimum, a plan of action that we want to suggest to the Water Control Board. The issues about ex parte rules, broadening the platform of the discussion, looking at our over-compliance beyond the federal requirements. I mean, I think there are a number of outstanding recommendations and concerns that were raised. We'll be communicating back as both as part of the committee and possibly with some legislation that we'll be looking at the beginning of the year. Again, I want to thank everyone for coming to Sacramento on a rainy day, or whether you came from Southern California, as did the 3 senators here, or whether or not you drove from San Luis Obispo or Roseville, which was a short hop for y'all. We appreciate the concern that you have. And on behalf of the committee, would certainly like to communicate that we understand, we feel that, and the purpose of the hearing was to reflect that we all share that concern, that we not be the ones that are costing jobs and economic growth. So thank you all for coming, and we'll be adjourned.